I was recently asked by Dan's brother Bill making stuff to be a part of a big bot bash. Bill made a beautiful bot randomizer that uses a D20 to determine the prompts by which you can use to create your robot. There are 20 options for each part of the robot, including the body, head, arms, hands, legs, and finally, the flavor of the robot. I wrote down what I rolled and I came up with a carapace body, head that looks dangerous, arms mismatched, guns for hands, triple jointed legs, and a polished flavor, which actually just describes a night castigator. Bill said no 3D printing, but he didn't say no night castigators, so I'm just going to build this today. Just kidding, that's a teaser for an upcoming project. I actually handpicked all of those roles for the joke. What I actually came up with was Death, Cyclopean, Mismatched, Buster, Dash, and Unlucky. And with those words in mind, that is how I'm going to be making my robot today. How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boylai Hobby Time. This build started where all of my Scratch builds do, and that's in my bits box. These bits right here were a gift from J-Han Lord of Cats, one of my patrons. He sent me a really nice care package recently, and I was very happy to be able to use some of those in this build. I sat and thought about making a plan for this build, but I usually find that pulling bits out is a great place to start. Even if I'm not going to be using the pieces, it helps me get in the creative mindset and start seeing potential shapes and finding forms in random unrelated objects. I have a few bits boxes that I can pull from with different genres of bits. I've collected bits from all over the place and I'm always on the lookout for more. In this case, I was looking for things that would work with the prompts that I rolled, and what caught my eye was this round ball from a lunar lander model kit. The prompt for the head was Cyclopean, which means it has to have one eye, and this ball seemed like the perfect thing to turn into an eye. After gluing some bits onto the ball, I glued the two halves of the ball together, and then I moved on to connecting the head to the rest of the body, the prompt for which is Death. I could have obviously gone plenty of directions in interpreting the word death, but I originally intended for the body to look like a gallows that was holding up the head. But as the build progressed, it began to look less and less like a gallows, but the inspiration for the design is still there. And I'm honestly okay with it looking not too much like an execution device. I used some styrene beams to create the frame and folded back the lower post toward the bottom of the ball. I drilled holes and ran other styrene rods through to create all of the joints. These hydraulic pistons came with the same lunar lander model kit as the ball. For the legs, my prompt was Dash, and that could have meant speedy, but I interpreted it as a horizontal stroke in writing or printing to represent omitted words. And omitted means to leave out or exclude, either forgetfully or intentionally. I found some leftover General Grievous arms in my bits box. I stripped off all of the plates that would reveal them to be Grievous's arms, and then I drilled some holes to attach them to the body, and finally gave them some hands from a Zaku Gunpla kit. The prompt for the arms was mismatched, so I made sure to bulk up the left arm with a nice big pauldron. For the hands, I rolled Buster, which I took as a reference to the Buster sword from Final Fantasy. My sword will be slightly different in shape, but the visual impact will be the same. I cut two identical pieces of 040 styrene into the shape of the blade, and I glued them together using some microsol, which essentially welds the sheets into one piece of plastic. After both halves of the blade were firmly stuck together and the solvent cement had dried, I sharpened the blade with an emery board, and I added a spine to the sword, which will go all the way back and become the handle of the sword. If you're wondering why the robot needs such a massive sword, don't worry, I will explain that in a minute. I made a little platform to sit above the robot's head, as well as a small ladder going up his back to reach said platform. The real reason for omitting the legs was so that I could have the robot appearing to be floating in the air, but actually being held up by a bent hanger wire. I matched the angle of the right arm and the Buster sword with the wire running all the way down and going into the base. I drilled a mounting hole in this base, and I was very happy to see it hold its own weight when I took my hands away. The flavor of the bot is Unlucky, and I'm adding this guy because of that. And while it may not be immediately apparent why that's unlucky, I'll do some explaining during the painting phase to help it all make sense. The last thing to add to the bot before the construction was done were some guitar string cables running up the arms. After the cables were in place, I cleaned up my workbench before moving on to the terrain. Also, if you're wondering why there are no ambient sound effects in this video, it's because my mic was not plugged in. I added a little wooden extension onto the base to get the bot more centered, and then it was time to add the terrain. I threw a handful of Sculptamold into a cup with some water, and I mixed it thoroughly with my gloved hand. Once the oatmeal was thoroughly mixed, I threw it on the base, and I covered the whole thing right down to the first lip on the decorative routed edge. I tried to make the little wooden extension piece look like a protruding rock. Once the whole base was covered, I smoothed it out and I left it to dry for 24 hours. The next thing to do was to throw on some grass. I used some Woodland Scenic static tack, which I spread evenly across the terrain, leaving a small edge around the outside where some dirt will be visible. I used my static grass applicator and sock on a vacuum combo to save the excess grass for later. And not only does it clean up the mess, it also helps all those little blades of grass stand up on end. Once the glue had fully dried, I took the grassy base outside and I primed it black, along with the bot, the man, and his little pet dog. And while I paint this bad boy, I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons. I painted the base with different shades of earth colors, working my way up lighter and lighter before switching to my shades of green. I am going to go back and change the color of the grass to a more yellowy and dry look, because as it is right now, it looks far too much like a lawn. I threw a deep lavender in the airbrush and then began painting the bot, the man, and his dog. And while I do that, I'll explain why the flavor of this robot is unlucky. Intergalactic Robot Makers Incorporated, or IRMI for short, are well known for their variety of robots. In their mail order catalog, they have everything from their popular kitchen appliance robots, like the Blender Bot or Dishwasher Bot, all the way up through their World Eater and Galactic Vengeance robot models. This bot, which is one of their mid-sized combat models, was made for warfare. He was programmed to crave war, specifically melee battles, with other robots or giant space crustaceans, hence the large sword. And all around the galaxy there are huge wars going on, all of which he longs to be a part of. The company still uses humans to process their mail orders, because robots have a hard time reading handwriting. Unfortunately, there was a mix-up due to two people of the same last name on two separate orders, and this robot ended up being sent to the wrong address on a sparsely populated planet with absolutely no war. The person who was originally going to receive this robot was instead sent a can opener robot. The new unintentional owner of the Buster Bot decided to take advantage of the unexpected upgrade and chose not to send it back. Instead, welded a ladder and a platform to the top of the bot from which he could observe the birds and local wildlife with his corgi. The corgi's name is Jay. Because bots cannot betray their owners, this robot's dreams of battlefields and cracking the shells of giant crabs on distant planets will never be realized. But instead, it must sit and watch birds with its new owner forever. That's why the man and his dog make the flavor of this robot unlucky. I started weathering and dirtying up the bot, but because it hasn't seen any war, I decided to give it a clean look again. There will also be no shortage of beautiful grime and weathering in this collaboration. Speaking of which, once you're done here, go check out the rest of the videos, which will be in a playlist below, and subscribe to each of their channels while you're at it. After masking off the cutting edge of the sword, I gave the rest of it a coat of matte black, and while I had the airbrush out, I went back and I added an artificial shadow to the grass and changed the color, which I think complements the color of the robot far better. I also covered the sides of the base with some oil washes. I dabbed up the excess with a paper towel to create a nice rocky rim. After that, it was time to paint the lower ring around the base with some black 4.0. And while I have the black 4.0 out, let's do a little side-by-side comparison with some black 3.0. I painted a little leftover 3D printed Bowser, and the first thing that I noticed was just how thick the 4.0 is in comparison to the 3.0. I gave only one coat to each half of this Bowser. I moved my lamp to light each side of the model evenly, and as you can see here, the 4.0 really does have much better coverage after one coat. I think it's possible that the 3.0 could have similar results if I added more layers, but in the end, that's a huge win for the 4.0. I peeled the masking tape off of the sword and then dabbed on some gunmetal with a sponge. which isn't weathering from battle, but the guy who originally ordered it selected distressed when choosing from the sword trim packages. I glued the bot into position, and the very last thing to do was to glue the little man with his binoculars and his little friend Jay in place. And after that, I called it good. That is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. A big thank you to Build Making Stuff for hosting this bot bash, and like I said earlier, please do go watch all of the rest of the videos that will be in the playlist linked below. Huge shout out as always to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.